Hey guys, how's it going? Last couple of weekends in our church we've been talking about living at peace with one another. Not only is following Jesus, the Prince of Peace, meant to lead to an uptick of peace in our hearts, but also in our relationships with others. Blessed are the peacemakers, Jesus said. And Paul said in Romans 12, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with others. So how do we do that? Sounds good on paper or in a podcast. But in practice, it's not so easy. See, we're so broken and riddled with selfishness. Let's take one example. How do you live at peace with one another when somebody sins against you? You ever had that happen? Well, the Bible speaks of this. It tells us that there's one of two paths that we can choose to take in that moment, and either may be appropriate depending on how God leads you. Let's talk about one of those approaches today. So if someone sins against you, one of the things the Bible says we can do is we can forbear the other. It says in Ephesians 4:2, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bear with one another, Paul writes. And he echoes the same thought later on in Colossians 3. So what does forbearance mean? In the dictionary, it means you choose not to do something you could do, or you choose not to say something that you could say. To bear with another person who has sinned against you means that you let it go. You give it over to Jesus and let him deal with it. It means you give the person a mulligan. You could throw the flag if you wanted to, but instead you pick it up. That's forbearance. Now, why might forbearance be the proper response sometimes when someone sins against you? I can think of a couple reasons. For starters, because we're all really good at sinning, and I mean really good. The sheer quantity of stupid, selfish things that we unleash in the world through our sin nature is immense beyond measure. On Thanksgiving Day, my wife Janice and I drove to Rochester, New York to be with family, and we're not 30 miles into our 400-mile journey and already having a little dust-up because she is so stubborn and I'm so dim-witted. You didn't give me a chance to finish. Because we're so good at sinning, do you really want to go through life taking note of each and every slight and offense and hurt that someone commits against you? Psalm 130 verse 3 says, "O Lord, if you counted sins, who could stand?" If every wrong thing that someone did to us had to be put on the table for examination and called to account and apologized for and made right, is that really a game you want to be playing? Because if it is, we all lose. Game over. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 13 that love keeps no record of wrongs. Better to learn a little forbearance is what he's saying. Better to learn a little Sergeant Schultz. I see nothing. A second reason that forbearance might be a good approach is because God forbears us all the time. Remember what Jesus said? He said, don't you be looking at the specks in other people's eye when you got a log hanging out of your own eye. You remember that? That's what we do. It's so much easier to see other people's sin than it is to see our own. I mean, just right now, try and look at what's at the end of your nose right now. Go ahead. It's just you and me. Not so easy, is it? Well, now look at the end of my nose. Huh? A lot simpler, isn't it? You got a yeah. Just kidding. But that's Jesus' point. We can see other people's sin easily enough, but our own, that's hard. But the thing is, our sin is so much greater, and yet God overlooks it time and time again. You ever ask somebody how you're doing and they say, better than I deserve? Well, that's a recognition of forbearance. Think of all the times you've said something or done something or thought something that you knew was wrong. And you looked up expecting the hammer to fall. And you know what you got? Nothing. God overlooked it. See, rather than take note of all the sinning that other people do, we need to start remembering more often all the forgiving that God does. forgiveness and grace and mercy. This is what will swallow whole the immensity of all our sinning. Peter said that love covers a multitude of sins. And Paul in Romans 5 said, where sin increased, grace abounded all the more. And James famously said, mercy triumphs over judgment. So give that same love and grace and mercy to others. People who are in the sin-counting business become whiny, bitter souls, like Jonah outside of Nineveh, on a hillside, waiting for judgment to fall on those nasty Assyrians. And God comes up to him and says, are you upset? And he says, you bet I'm upset! And it's ugly. You don't want to imitate him. He's a miserable, crotchety old man at that point. Like Inspector Javert in Les Miserables. Remember him? Who will not, must not deviate 1 inch from the law or his world will fall apart. Meanwhile, opposed to him is Jean Valjean, the man of grace, in whom the Spirit of Jesus shines. Which would you rather be? Shortly before he ends his life, Javert looks at the heavens and shakes his fist and says, there is nothing on earth that we share. It is either Valjean or Javert. It's absolutely brilliant how the writers of that story captured that tug of war that takes place inside of our hearts between law and grace. Because you see, grace is incomprehensible to someone who is in the business of always tallying up other people's sinning. Forbearance allows grace room to operate. Forbearance permits God to run the universe. It lets him fix the people who need fixing. You and I don't need to micromanage that. And so, forbearance is the appropriate response at times, many times, when people sin against us. Now, there is another path we can choose to take, and we'll talk about that next time. Jesus speaks very clearly about this. But for now, let this sit on your heart and think about this. Get out there today and put up with people for Jesus' sake. We'll talk to you next time.